I watched my parents hand my sister $55 million in front of 200 guests, then order me to leave with a single suitcase. Did I walk away quietly? No. I let them tighten the noose around their own necks, while I learned to hold the rope. This is how I turned a forged signature and absolute poverty into a weapon, watching the family who discarded me lose the only thing they ever truly loved. My name is Mackenzie Hoffman, and right now, the only thing separating me from hypothermia is a thin, polyester blend blazer that is rapidly soaking through. I am gripping the cold, wrought iron bars of the front gate to the Lane estate, my knuckles turning white, not from the temperature, but from the sheer, crushing force of my grip. The metal is freezing, biting into my palms with a hostility that feels almost personal, but I cannot seem to let go. If I let go, I have to turn around. And if I turn around, I have to acknowledge the empty road behind me and the absolute darkness that is swallowing Northbridge on Christmas Eve. It is raining, a sleety, miserable mix that hisses as it hits the asphalt. My breath is coming in short, sharp bursts, visible as white plumes of smoke that vanish instantly into the gray night. Inside the gates, up the long, winding driveway lined with manicured boxwoods that I used to decorate as a child. The house is glowing. It looks like a lantern fueled by old money and cruelty. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the grand foyer, I can see the golden light spilling out onto the wet stone terrace. It looks warm. It looks like heaven. I can faintly hear the sound of a string quartet playing something tasteful, likely Vivaldi, drifting through the insulation and the storm. It is the soundtrack of my life, playing on a loop while the credits roll on my existence as a member of this family. Only 60 minutes ago, I was inside that warmth. I need to replay it. I need to replay it to understand how a human being goes from being a daughter to a trespasser in the span of 1 hour. I had arrived late. That was nothing new. I work at Nova Reach Communications, a PR firm in the city that treats junior associates like battery hens, and I had come straight from the subway. I remember the feeling of walking into the foyer, clutching my battered work laptop against my chest like a shield. I was wearing this same charcoal suit, which was already wrinkled from a 10-hour shift, and my heels were scuffed at the toes. The contrast between me and the 200 guests filling the marble-floored hall was violent. The air smelled of expensive perfume, cedarwood, and the specific, metallic tang of very expensive champagne. Everyone was in black tie. My sister, Sloane, was standing near the center of the room, looking like a deity. She was wearing a silver gown that looked like it had been poured over her body in liquid form, catching the light with every breath she took. She didn't look tired. Sloane never looks tired. I tried to blend into the background near a potted fern, hoping to grab a glass of water and maybe hide in the library until the speeches were over, but the room went silent too quickly. My father, Douglas Lane, had stepped onto the raised platform near the staircase. He tapped a crystal flute with a silver spoon, the sound chiming out like a judgment bell. He looked magnificent. I have to admit, Douglas always does. He has the kind of silver hair and jawline that makes people trust him with their life savings just before he ruins them. He smiled, but his eyes were dead calm. "Thank you all for coming," he said, his voice projecting without a microphone, rich and authoritative. "Tonight is not just an engagement party for Sloane. It is a celebration of legacy." I watched from the back, shifting my weight from one sore foot to the other. I expected a toast to her fiancé, a bland investment banker named Preston, but Douglas didn't even look at him. "We have made a decision regarding the Lane Heritage Trust," Douglas announced. The room seemed to hold its collective breath. This was the big money, the generational wealth. Effective immediately, the entirety of the trust, valued at $55 million, is being transferred to Sloane. $55 million. He said the number casually, as if he were ordering lunch. He didn't stutter. He didn't hesitate. "This is a reward," he continued, his gaze sweeping the room, "for discipline, for achievement, and above all, for loyalty." My stomach dropped. I felt the nausea before I felt the humiliation. I knew what was coming next because I know Douglas Lane. He cannot elevate someone without destroying someone else. It is the physics of his ego. He turned his head. His eyes found me in the back of the room, huddled in my cheap suit. The crowd followed his gaze. 200 pairs of eyes, senators, CEOs, socialites, landed on me. I felt like a specimen under a microscope slide that was about to be smashed. "And to my other daughter, Mackenzie," he said, his tone shifting from pride to a performance of weary disappointment. "Mackenzie has never demonstrated the necessary fortitude to carry this name. She has drifted. She has struggled. She is, frankly, a professional burden." A ripple of uncomfortable silence moved through the room. Someone coughed. But Sloane? Sloane was beaming. She raised her glass slightly in my direction, a gesture that looked like a toast but felt like a knife. I wanted to speak. I wanted to scream that I was the only one working a real job, that I hadn't taken a penny from them in 3 years, that the struggle he mocked was just me trying to survive without his puppet strings. But my throat had closed up. Then my mother, Vivian, stepped up to the microphone. If Douglas is the hammer, Vivian is the scalpel. She wrapped her arm around Douglas's waist and looked at me with eyes that were glistening with performed tears. "We love you, Mackenzie," she said, her voice trembling just enough to be convincing to the audience. "And because we love you, we have to practice tough love. You have become a weight on this family. My dear, a heavy one. And we cannot carry you anymore. You need to learn to stand on your own 2 feet." She paused for effect. "You need to find your own way to grow up, elsewhere, tonight." I didn't understand what she meant until the head of security, a man named Thomas, whom I had once made a birthday card for when I was 7, tapped me on the shoulder. He didn't look me in the eye. "Ms. Hoffman," he said quietly, "I've been instructed to escort you out." "What?" I whispered, my voice cracking. "I live in the guest cottage. My things." "Your key cards have been deactivated, ma'am. The code to the cottage has been changed." He gestured to a single, scuffed plastic suitcase standing near the coat check. "Your mother had the staff pack your essentials." It was a public execution. It was seamless. While the guests awkwardly sipped their vintage Pinot Noir and pretended not to watch, I was surgically removed from the family organism. I didn't make a scene. That is the one thing they taught me well. Never make a scene. I took the handle of the suitcase. It felt light, terrifyingly light. I walked out past the champagne tower. I walked past Sloane, who was now accepting hugs from congratulations. I walked out the heavy oak doors and heard the lock click shut behind me with a finality that echoed in my bones. Which brings me back to now. Standing in the rain. The cold is seeping through my shoes now. My toes are numb. The realization of what elsewhere means is starting to hit me. I don't have an apartment. I gave up my lease 6 months ago to move into the guest cottage to save money and help care for Vivian after her surgery. A surgery I now suspect was as minor as her conscience. I let go of the gate. My hands are red and stiff. I need to move. I need to think. "Okay, Mackenzie," I say aloud, my voice lost in the wind. "Okay, motel. Just get to a motel." I drag the suitcase through a puddle and reach into my pocket for my car keys. My Honda Civic is old, a beat-up thing I bought with my own money from my first year at Nova Reach, but it has a heater. That is all that matters. It is parked just on the other side of this gate. I jam my hand into my pocket, but before I can pull the keys out, a hand snakes through the bars of the gate. It is a man's hand, wearing a Patek Philippe watch. I know that watch. I look up to see Colin Mercer standing on the dry side of the gate, under the shelter of the security umbrella. Colin is Douglas's executive assistant, a man whose ambition is only matched by his lack of a soul. He is smiling, a tight, polite expression that doesn't reach his eyes. He grabs my wrist. His grip is surprisingly strong. He pries my fingers open and plucks the car keys from my palm. "Hey," I shout, grabbing at the bars. "That's my car. I paid for that." Colin steps back, safely out of reach, dangling the keys in front of me like he is taunting a dog. "Actually, Mackenzie," he says, his voice smooth and maddeningly calm. If you check the title, you will see the vehicle was purchased under the family's umbrella corporation for insurance purposes. Technically, it is a company asset. I paid the monthly installments to Dad, I scream, the rain plastering my hair to my face. I paid him every month. Rent, Colin corrects me. You were paying for usage, and since you are no longer an employee or a resident of the Lane estate, authorization for usage has been revoked. He presses a button on the remote. The Honda, my Honda, chirps once and the headlights flash, a cruel wink, before going dark. Douglas thought it best you don't have any liabilities holding you back, Colin says. He turns around. Merry Christmas, Mackenzie. Colin, I scream. Colin, please, it's freezing. He doesn't look back. He walks up the driveway, his silhouette disappearing into the golden glow of the house. I stand there for a long time. The wind is picking up, cutting through my wet clothes like a razor. I pull my phone out of my pocket. 3% battery, no notifications, no just kidding texts. My banking app shows a balance that wouldn't cover a night at the Ritz, and I have a feeling that even that small number is about to disappear if Douglas has anything to do with it. I look down at my suitcase. One suitcase. That is what 26 years of being a daughter amounts to. The road ahead is pitch black. The nearest town, Ridgeline, is 3 miles away. It is a poor town, a place the people in Northbridge only drive through with their doors locked, but it is the only place I can go. I grip the handle of my suitcase. The wheels are cheap plastic. They are going to struggle on the wet gravel. I turn my back on the mansion, on the $55 million, on the warmth, and step into the dark. The water in my shoes squelches with every step. I am alone. I am cold, and for the first time in my life, I have absolutely nothing to lose. 3 miles is a distance that means nothing in a car. It is 5 minutes of music, a quick scroll through emails, a non-event, but dragging a plastic suitcase with a broken wheel along the shoulder of a cracked asphalt road in the middle of an ice storm changes the definition of distance entirely. 3 miles becomes a lifetime. The pavement leading toward Ridgeline was not maintained like the heated driveways of Northbridge. Here, the road was a graveyard of neglect. Every 40 feet, the front left wheel of my suitcase would catch on a fissure in the tarmac, wrenching my shoulder back and sending a shockwave of pain down my arm. My feet were bleeding. I could feel the precise moment the skin on my heels gave way to the friction of my wet shoes. But the cold was a small mercy. It numbed the raw flesh just enough to keep me moving. By the time the neon sign of the Pinecone Motel flickered into view, blinking with a dying buzzing sound, my hair was frozen into stiff, icy strands against my neck. I looked like a drowned rat, but I didn't care. I just needed 4 walls and a heater. I pushed open the door to the lobby. It smelled of stale cigarette smoke and pine sol, a chemical attempt to mask decades of despair. The clerk was a man in his 50s with a grease stain on his shirt and eyes that had seen every variety of bad luck this town had to offer. He didn't look up from his small television as I dragged my dripping suitcase onto the linoleum. "Single room," I said, my voice shaking so hard the words sounded fractured. "Please." He slid a registration card across the counter without looking at me. I filled it out with trembling fingers, my handwriting looking like that of a child. Then, I reached into the hidden lining of my purse and pulled out the emergency credit card. It was a Platinum Amex, authorized by Douglas 3 years ago for life-or-death situations. I figured avoiding hypothermia counted. The clerk took the card. He looked at the heavy metal weight of it, then at my soaked, mud-splattered suit, then at my face. He swiped it. The machine beeped, a harsh, dissonant tone. He frowned and swiped it again. Another beep. "Card's no good," he grunted. "That's impossible," I stammered, leaning against the counter to keep my knees from buckling. "There is no limit on that card. Please, try it manually." He looked at the screen, and his expression shifted from indifference to suspicion. "It doesn't say declined, lady. It says pick up card and reported stolen." My heart hammered against my ribs. Stolen. Douglas hadn't just cut me off. He had actively criminalized my survival. He knew I would try to use this. He had been waiting for the notification. "I didn't steal it," I whispered. "My name is on it. Look." The clerk pulled the card back, his hand inching toward the landline phone on the wall. "Name matches, sure, but the system says stolen, and looking at you, I'm inclined to believe the system. You need to leave, now, before I call the sheriff." "Please," I begged, the dignity I thought I had preserved at the party finally cracking. "It is freezing out there. I just need to sit in the lobby for an hour." "Out," he said, picking up the receiver. I turned around. I walked back out into the sleet. The door chimed cheerfully behind me, a mockery of a welcome. There was nowhere else to go. The only structure nearby was a bus shelter about 200 yards down the road, a glass and metal box illuminated by a single, flickering street lamp. I dragged my suitcase over the curb and collapsed onto the metal bench inside. The plexiglass walls were scratched opaque with graffiti and grime, offering little protection from the wind that whipped around the sides. I wasn't alone. Tied to the metal post of the bench with a fraying piece of rope was a dog. It looked like a terrier mix, medium-sized, with fur that was matted and soaked through to the skin. It was shivering so violently that its teeth were chattering, a sound that harmonized with the rattling of the shelter walls. It looked at me with eyes that held no expectation of kindness, only a dull acceptance of the end. "You too, huh?" I whispered. I reached into my bag. I had meant to eat lunch today, but a crisis meeting at the firm had run long. Buried at the bottom, wrapped in foil, was a turkey wrap from 2 days ago. It was stale, the tortilla hard at the edges, but right now it was the most valuable thing I owned. I unwrapped it. The smell of the processed turkey was faint in the cold air. I broke off a piece and held it out. The dog didn't move at first. It flinched, expecting a blow, but the hunger won out. It stretched its neck, took the piece gently from my fingers, and swallowed it whole. "Slow down," I murmured, breaking off another piece. "We have time." We sat there, two castaways on the edge of the world, sharing a 2-day-old sandwich. I ate half, fighting the nausea of stress, and gave the rest to the dog. When the food was gone, the dog shifted closer. It didn't bark or whine. It just pressed its wet, shivering body against my leg. I rested my hand on its head, feeling the heat of another living thing, and that small connection was the only thing that kept me from screaming. That was when I noticed the woman. I had been so focused on the dog and my own misery that I hadn't looked at the far end of the bench. Sitting in the deepest shadow of the shelter was an elderly woman. She was small, her posture hunched as if trying to fold herself into nothingness. She wasn't dressed for winter. She wasn't even dressed for outside. She wore a thin, floral print house dress that clung to her frail frame, and on her feet were bedroom slippers. They were soaked, dark with slush, essentially useless against the freezing ground. Her hair was silver and plastered to her skull by the rain. Her lips were turning a terrifying shade of violet. She was shaking, a high-frequency vibration that rattled her bones. I stared at her. She looked like she had wandered out of a nursing home and gotten lost. She looked like she was dying. Her eyes, cloudy and rimmed with red, drifted toward me. They locked onto my blazer. It was wool, expensive, and while it was damp on the outside, it was still trapping my body heat. "That looks warm," she wheezed. Her voice was like dry leaves scraping together. I looked down at my jacket. Then I looked at her purple lips. A voice in my head, a voice that sounded remarkably like my mother, screamed at me, "Do not be an idiot, Mackenzie. You are already hypothermic. If you give up this layer, you will freeze. You have nothing. You need to survive." I clutched the lapels of my blazer. I was so cold that my bones hurt. Why should I help her? Who had helped me tonight? My own parents had thrown me to the wolves. The world was cruel. The world was transactional. If I wanted to survive, I needed to be selfish. Douglas had just taught me that lesson with a $55 million price tag. But then the dog pressed harder against my leg, and I looked at the woman's hands. They were gnarled, covered in liver spots, and clutching her own arms so tightly her fingernails were digging into the skin. They can take the house. I thought, they can take the trust fund. They can take the car and the credit rating and the name. But if I let this woman freeze to death 2 feet away from me because I am afraid of being cold, then I am exactly what Douglas says I am. I stood up. My legs were stiff. Here, I said. I unbuttoned my blazer. The wind hit my silk blouse instantly, biting into my skin like 1,000 needles. I gasped, the air rushing out of my lungs, but I forced myself to peel the jacket off. I stepped over to the woman and draped it around her shoulders. She was so small she seemed to disappear inside the tailored wool. Button it up, I said through chattering teeth, wrapping my arms around myself in a futile attempt to hold in the last of my warmth. It blocks the wind. The woman looked up at me, for a second. The cloudiness in her eyes seemed to clear, replaced by something sharp, something assessing. But then she just huddled into the coat. You're freezing, she whispered. I'm fine, I lied. I'm young. You take it. I sat back down next to the dog. The cold was now an active aggressor. My vision started to blur at the edges. I wondered how long it would take to lose consciousness. I wondered if the morning commuters would find 3 frozen bodies here, a girl, a dog, and an old woman. Then, the darkness exploded. Twin beams of high-intensity halogen light cut through the rain, blinding me. I threw a hand up to shield my eyes as a convoy of 3 black SUVs roared to a halt directly in front of the bus shelter. They didn't look like police cars. They looked like military transport for the extremely wealthy. The doors of the lead vehicle flew open before the wheels had even stopped rolling. A man stepped out. He was tall, broad-shouldered, holding a massive black umbrella that seemed impervious to the wind. He wore a suit that cost more than my college tuition. He walked straight toward the shelter, ignoring the slush splashing onto his polished shoes. "Mackenzie Hoffman?" he called out. His voice was deep, carrying a distinct, rhythmic lilt of Ireland. It wasn't a question. It was a verification. I tried to stand, but my legs wouldn't work. Who are you?" The man didn't answer me. He looked past me, toward the corner of the bench. "Mrs. Hart," he said, his tone shifting to one of immense respect. "The car is warm. We have the tea you asked for." I turned my head. The old woman was standing up. She didn't struggle to rise. She didn't wheeze. She stood with a spine of steel. Her hands, which had been shaking moments ago, reached up and unbuttoned my blazer with steady, precise movements. She let the jacket slide from her shoulders, catching it neatly on one arm. Underneath the house dress, which she unzipped and stepped out of in one fluid motion. She wasn't wearing rags. She was wearing a dry, pristine cashmere sweater and dark trousers tucked into equestrian riding boots that gleamed in the headlights. She wasn't a lost grandmother. She was power personified. She turned to the Irishman. "Thank you, Marcus. Take the dog as well. He is coming with us." Then she turned to me. The frailty was gone from her face, replaced by a gaze that was terrifyingly intelligent. It was Eleanor Hart, the recluse, the billionaire philanthropist whose name was whispered in Northbridge like a myth. She held my wet blazer out to me, not as a return, but as an offering. "Congratulations, Mackenzie," she said, her voice clear and strong, cutting through the storm. "You just passed a test that very few people survive." "A test?" I managed to choke out, my brain failing to process the hallucination in front of me. "Douglas Lane thinks poverty is a weakness," she said, signaling Marcus to open the back door of the SUV. "I happen to believe it is the only way to see who a person actually is when the lights go out. Get in the car. Mackenzie, we have a great deal of work to do." The silence inside the SUV was absolute, sealed off from the storm by bulletproof glass and heavy insulation that muffled the drumming of the hail to a distant, rhythmic whisper. The air smelled of expensive leather and sanitized stillness. I sat huddled under a wool blanket that Marcus had thrown over me, my teeth still chattering with a violence that shook my entire ribcage. Beside me, the dog was curled into a ball on the floor mat, already asleep. exhausted by the mere act of survival. Across from me, Eleanor Hart did not offer me comfort. She did not offer me a tissue or a warm word about how terrible my parents were. She sat with her legs crossed, watching me over the rim of a porcelain teacup. Her gaze was surgical. She was dissecting me, looking for cracks, assessing structural integrity. I was not a rescue case to her. I was an asset acquisition that she was currently debating the value of. "Stop shaking, Mackenzie," she said. Her voice was not loud, but it had the weight of a gavel. "It burns calories you cannot afford to lose. Drink the tea." I lifted the cup with both hands, the china rattling against my teeth as I took a sip. The liquid was hot, sweet, and strong. It hit my stomach like a flare. "Why?" I asked, my voice raw. "Why were you at the bus stop? Why pretend to be, to be weak?" Eleanor finished for me. She set her cup down. "Because people reveal their true nature only when they think no one of consequence is watching. If I had approached you as Eleanor Hart, you would have been polite. You would have been guarded. I needed to see what you do when you are stripped to the bone, and you gave a freezing old woman your only coat." "I thought you were dying," I said. "I know," she replied. "That is the point. Compassion without an audience is a rare commodity in our circle, but compassion alone is useless. It gets you killed. Or, in your case, it gets you evicted on Christmas Eve." She nodded toward the front seat. "Marcus?" The large Irishman didn't turn around. He simply reached over the console and handed me a thin blue folder. It looked official. The label on the tab read, "Lane Ridge Ventures, LLC." I frowned, my fingers clumsy as I opened it. Inside was a single document. It was a loan guarantee agreement with a private equity firm I had never heard of. For the amount of $600,000? I scanned the legalese, my brain sluggish from the cold. The borrower was Lane Ridge Ventures. The date was 3 days ago, and at the bottom of the page, directly above the line marked Personal Guarantor, was a signature. Mackenzie A. Hoffman. My breath hitched. I stared at the ink, the loop of the M, the sharp cross of the F. It was my signature. It was perfect. But I had never seen this paper in my life. "I didn't sign this," I whispered, looking up at Eleanor. "I have never seen this company. I didn't sign this." "I know you didn't," Eleanor said calmly. "Marcus had you under surveillance 3 days ago. You were at your desk at Nova Reach, eating a bagel and formatting a press release for a gluten-free bakery. You were nowhere near the notary public who stamped that document." "Then how, Your father," Eleanor said. She said the word father with the same distaste one might use for a cockroach. "Douglas is currently hemorrhaging liquidity. He has bought into a fund called Aurora Nexus Capital. Have you heard of it?" I shook my head. "You wouldn't have. It is an invitation-only investment club promising 40% returns through green energy arbitrage. It is very exclusive, very shiny, and very fraudulent. The Securities and Exchange Commission has been building a file on them for 6 months. It is a Ponzi scheme. Mackenzie, and Douglas is throwing everything he has into it." She leaned forward, her eyes locking onto mine. "He needs cash to buy in deeper, to chase the losses he has already made. But his credit is overextended. He couldn't guarantee this loan himself. So, he used the one asset he had that was clean, you." I looked back down at the paper. $600,000. "He forged my signature," I said, the reality setting in like a heavy stone in my gut. "He took out a loan in my name. And then," Eleanor continued, "he staged a piece of theater at an engagement party to publicly disown you. Do you understand why? It wasn't just cruelty. Mackenzie, it was strategy. By kicking you out, by cutting off your phone and your access, he ensures you won't receive the default notices when they start arriving. He ensures you are homeless, resourceless, and impossible to locate. When the loan goes bad, and it will go bad within 60 days, the creditors will come for the guarantor. They will come for you, and Douglas will throw up his hands and say his unstable, estranged daughter must have done it to fund a drug habit or a secret life. And that is why he had to ask her to leave. The horror of it was so complete it felt numbing. It wasn't enough that they didn't love me. It wasn't enough that they favored Sloane. Douglas had actively built a trap door under my feet, waited for me to stand on it, and then pulled the lever, all while smiling and drinking champagne. I wasn't a daughter. I was a human shield. He set me up, I said. My voice didn't shake anymore. The cold was being replaced by something else, a heat that started in the center of my chest. He set me up to go to prison for debt fraud. Correction, Eleanor said sharp. He set you up to be destroyed. Whether that happens in prison or on the streets is irrelevant to him, as long as the liability is off his books. I'll go to the police, I said, gripping the folder. I'll tell them it's a forgery. You have proof. You said you were watching me. And Douglas has a team of lawyers on retainer who cost more per hour than you earn in a year, Eleanor countered. He has the notary on his payroll. He has the narrative. He is the respected pillar of the community. You are the hysterical girl who was thrown out for being a burden. By the time the police unravel the truth, your credit will be ruined, your name will be mud, and the lawsuit will have buried you. She paused, letting the hopelessness of my position sink in. Or, she said softly, I looked up. Or you can stop acting like a victim who is waiting for the world to be fair, and you can start learning how the world actually works. Eleanor opened a compartment in the armrest and pulled out a second document. It was much shorter. It was an employment contract on Heartlight Trust letterhead. I am offering you a job, Mackenzie, not as an assistant, not as a charity case. I am offering you a spot in my executive training program. The salary is $220,000 a year, plus full benefits and housing. My mouth fell open slightly. $220,000. That was 4 times what I made at the PR firm. Before you say yes, Eleanor warned, holding up a hand, understand what you are agreeing to. This is not a 9-to-5. I own you for 9 months. You will work 18 hours a day. You will learn forensic accounting, corporate law, construction management, and hostile negotiation. I will break you down, and I will rebuild you. I will make you cry, and I will not care. I am not looking for a daughter. I am looking for a successor who can handle the sharks because she knows how to bite back. Why? I asked again. Why me? You could hire MBAs from Harvard. I have hired MBAs from Harvard, Eleanor scoffed. They are soft. They have never been cold. When I saw you wrap that coat around me, Mackenzie, I didn't see kindness. I saw discipline. I saw someone who was willing to suffer discomfort to uphold a standard. That is the only kind of person I can trust with my legacy. Someone who knows what it feels like to be on the outside. She placed the contract on top of the forgery. Option A, she said, pointing to the loan. You get out of this car. You try to fight Douglas alone. You lose. You spend the next 10 years paying off a debt you didn't incur. She pointed to the Heartlight contract. Option B, you come with me. You disappear. We let Douglas think he has won. We let him dig his hole deeper, and while he's doing that, I teach you how to bury him in it. I looked at the forgery. I looked at the signature that was a lie. I thought about Sloane laughing in her silver dress. I thought about Vivian's fake tears. I thought about Douglas looking at me with dead eyes and calling me a burden. They thought I was weak. They thought I was the soft one, the one who would just fade away into the background and die quietly so they wouldn't be embarrassed. I reached out and touched the Heartlight contract. The paper felt thick, substantial. The shivering stopped completely. I don't want to just survive this, I said. The words tasted like iron. I don't want to just clear my name. What do you want, Mackenzie? Eleanor asked. I met her eyes. I want to take it all, I said. I want to watch him lose the house. I want to watch him lose the reputation. I want him to feel exactly as helpless as I felt outside that gate. Eleanor smiled. It wasn't a warm smile. It was the smile a general gives a soldier who has just volunteered for the suicide mission. Good, she said. Then sign the paper. We have a lot of work to do before morning. I took the pen from her hand. My fingers were stiff, but my grip was steady. I signed my name, Not the weak, looped signature on the forgery, but a new one, sharper, harder. I handed the contract back to her. I am not just going to escape my father. Mrs. Hart, I said, looking out the window at the darkness where my old life used to be. I am going to outlive him, in every way that matters to him. Then welcome to Heartlight, Eleanor said. Driver, take us home. The SUV surged forward, the engine growling low and powerful, carrying me away from the ruins of Mackenzie Hoffman and toward whoever I was about to become. If you think freezing on a sidewalk is the coldest feeling in the world, you have obviously never stood at the head of a mahogany conference table in a room full of 60-year-old real estate developers, trying to explain the zoning laws of a town you have never lived in. 72 hours after I signed my soul away to Heartlight, Eleanor threw me into the deep end. Not just the deep end, she threw me into a tank full of sharks and poured blood in the water. The project was called East Ridgeline. It was a mixed-income housing initiative that Heartlight was backing, a delicate ecosystem of government grants, private equity, and community goodwill, and I, Mackenzie Hoffman, whose previous biggest professional achievement was organizing a gluten-free bake sale for a client, was supposed to lead the pitch. I stood there in a suit Marcus had bought for me that morning, navy blue, sharp, armor-plated, and clicked to the next slide. And as you can see, I said, my voice pitching up an octave higher than I wanted, the community synergy here will be vibrant. We are looking at a really holistic approach to the living space. The room was silent. It was the kind of silence that has teeth. Sitting at the far end of the table was Frank Russo, a general contractor who looked like he chewed gravel for breakfast and flossed with barbed wire. He leaned back in his chair, crossing arms that were the size of my thighs. Community synergy, Russo repeated. He made the words sound like a slur. Miss Hoffman, is it? Yes, I said, gripping the laser pointer so hard my knuckles were white. Miss Hoffman, I have been pouring concrete since before you were a gleam in your daddy's eye. I don't give a damn about synergy. I asked you about the soil mitigation report for the floodplain on Lot 4, because if we don't account for the runoff, that holistic living space is going to be underwater by April. I froze. I looked at Eleanor. She was sitting to my right, staring at a spot on the wall with the detachment of a monk. She wasn't going to save me. She was letting me burn. Well, I stammered, flipping through my notes, sweating despite the aggressive air conditioning. We are aware of the environmental factors, and we plan to— You don't know, Russo cut in. He didn't yell. He just stated it as a fact. He looked around the room at the other developers, a smirk curling his lip. This is what happens when you send a trust fund doll to do a foreman's job. Go back to the country club. Sweetheart, let the adults talk about drainage. The laughter that followed wasn't loud, but it stripped the skin right off me. It was a dismissal. It was a confirmation of everything Douglas had said about me. I stood there, burning with shame, while Eleanor quietly closed her notebook, stood up, and walked out of the room. I had to follow her. The elevator ride down to the lobby was agonizing. I watched the numbers count down, 20, 19, 18, wishing the cable would snap and put me out of my misery. Name 3 things, Eleanor said, not looking at me. What? Name 3 things you did not understand in that meeting. If you can only name 3, I will be impressed. The soil mitigation, I whispered. The lien waivers, and the union modulation rates. Also the easement rights on the south border, the difference between commercial and residential load-bearing requirements, and why Frank Russo knew he could bully you. Eleanor added. The doors opened at the lobby. You speak like a brochure, Mackenzie. Brochures end up in the trash. When I got to the small, windowless office they had assigned me in the Heartlight basement, Marcus was waiting. He dropped a stack of books onto my desk with a thud that shook my monitor. It wasn't a figure of speech. It was a literal tower of knowledge. Advanced Forensic Accounting, Municipal Zoning Laws of Washington State, Structural Engineering for Non-Engineers, The Art of Negotiation. You have 12 weeks, Marcus said, His Irish accent was devoid of its usual warmth. Eleanor wants you to stop sounding like a PR girl and start sounding like someone who can fire Frank Russo. Read them. My life became a blur of exhaustion and grit. I woke up every morning at 4 o'clock. My alarm was the sound of impending doom. I would drink coffee that tasted like battery acid, read 3 chapters on tax law, and be in the car by 6. Marcus drove me to the sites, but he didn't let me sit in the car. I had to walk the ground. Horizon Haven was the current flagship project, a complex for single parents that was currently just a skeleton of steel and mud. "What is that?" Marcus asked one Tuesday, pointing to a stack of metal rods. "That's piping," I guessed, adjusting the hard hat that was 2 sizes too big for my head. "It is rebar, Mackenzie," Marcus sighed, pinching the bridge of his nose. "It goes inside the concrete to give it tensile strength. If you plumb a toilet with that, you are going to have a very bad day." 2 laborers standing nearby heard him. They didn't even try to hide their snickers. "Hey, princess," one of them called out. "Make sure you don't break a nail on the heavy stuff." I wanted to curl up and die. I wanted to go back to my old life where my biggest problem was a client not liking the font on an invitation. But I couldn't go back. That door was locked. So I learned. I learned that there is a specific way to stand on a construction site. You don't cross your arms. It makes you look defensive. You don't put your hands in your pockets. It makes you look lazy. You hook your thumbs on your belt loops, or you hold the clipboard like a shield. You widen your stance. You take up space. I learned that Timberland Pro boots, with the steel shank, are the only things that will save your arches after 12 hours on concrete. I learned that if you wear the cheap hard hat, the plastic suspension digs into your temples until you have a migraine that blinds you. So you spend the $80 for the carbon fiber one. My hands changed. The manicures were gone, obviously. My cuticles were ragged. I developed a callus on my right middle finger from gripping a pen and a permanent bruise on my hip from bumping into scaffolding. I started to smell like wet drywall and sawdust. But the biggest change wasn't physical. It was the anger. At first, the anger was a wildfire that burned me up, but slowly, under Eleanor's brutal tutelage, I compressed it. I turned it into a cold, hard diamond of focus. 6 weeks in, I was sitting in my office at 10 at night, cross-referencing invoices for the Horizon Haven drywall installation. My eyes were burning, but something caught my attention. The supplier, a guy named Miller who always called me Sweetie when he dropped off the manifests, had listed 400 sheets of 5/8 Type X drywall. I pulled up the blueprints. I did the math. The square footage didn't add up. Even with a generous 15% waste overage, he was charging us for 60 sheets more than the building could physically hold. I checked the price. He had marked up the delivery fee by 12% compared to the last quarter. It was small, a few $1,000s. In the grand scheme of a multi-million-dollar project, it was a rounding error. Old Mackenzie would have signed it just to go home and sleep. New Mackenzie felt a predatory thrill. The next morning, it was pouring rain. The site was a mud pit. Miller was standing by his truck, drinking coffee from a styrofoam cup, laughing with one of his drivers. I walked up to him. I didn't smile. I didn't apologize for interrupting. "Mr. Miller," I said. My voice was low, fighting the sound of the rain and the jackhammers. "Morning, sweetie," he grinned. "Check ready for me?" I held up the invoice, now covered in my red ink. "You charged us for 400 sheets," I said. "The framing specs only allow for 320. Max, unless you are planning to drywall the parking lot, you are overbilling us." Miller's smile faltered. "Now look, honey, you gotta account for breakage. Cuts?" I calculated a 15% waste margin. I cut him off. "You are still 60 sheets over. And this delivery fee? You bumped it 12%. The price of diesel has actually dropped 3% since last month. So unless your trucks are running on champagne, this number is wrong." He stepped closer. It was an intimidation tactic. He was a big guy, and he used his height to loom over me. "You're nickeling and diming. Hoffman, that's how the business works. Don't be difficult." I didn't step back. I planted my boots in the mud. I remembered what Marcus taught me. Widen the stance. Hold the ground. I am not being difficult, Mr. Miller, I said, looking him dead in the eye. I am being the person who signs your checks. You have two options. 1, you reprint this invoice with the correct count and the original delivery fee. Or 2, I call the other 3 drywall suppliers in the county. Tell them your contract is void and explain exactly why. He stared at me. The rain dripped off the brim of his hat. He looked for the fear. He looked for the trust fund doll who would fold if he raised his voice. He didn't find her. Fine, he grunted, snatching the clipboard from my hand. I'll fix the damn numbers, but you're a real pain in the ass. You know that? I know, I said. Have it on my desk by noon. I walked away. My heart was hammering against my ribs, but my hands weren't shaking. I walked past Marcus, who was leaning against a support beam, watching. He didn't high-five me. He didn't cheer. He just gave a barely perceptible nod. That night, in the elevator going up to Eleanor's penthouse for my nightly interrogation, I caught my reflection in the polished brass doors. I looked tired. There were dark circles under my eyes that no amount of concealer would hide. My hair was pulled back in a severe, messy bun. I wasn't pretty in the way Northbridge defined pretty, but I looked solid. I realized then that Eleanor wasn't teaching me how to be a developer. She was teaching me how to be a weapon. And for the first time since that night at the gate, I didn't feel like a victim. I felt dangerous. I was no longer the girl who got kicked out. I was the girl who checked the math. And God help anyone who tried to lie to me now. It was the kind of heat that sat on your chest like a wet wool blanket. July in the valley was a brutal, airless season, and the humidity at the Horizon Haven site turned the dust into a fine, gritty paste that clung to everything. I was kneeling in the mud of Unit 4, tracing a bundle of Romex wiring that looked suspicious, sweat stinging my eyes. My Heartlight t-shirt, once a crisp navy blue, was now faded to a bruised purple and stained with caulk, primer, and dirt. My hair was shoved under a bandana, and I knew, without looking in a mirror, that I had a smudge of grease across my cheek. I looked like I belonged there. That was the irony. I had finally stopped looking like a tourist in a hard hat and started looking like part of the crew. Then I heard the click of heels on concrete. It was a sound that didn't belong. Not here. Not among the work boots and the gravel. I stood up, wiping my hands on my jeans, and turned around. Standing in the framed doorway of Unit 4, looking like she had just stepped out of a photo shoot for Vogue, was Sloane. She was wearing white. Who wears white to a construction site? Sloane Lane does. She held her phone up, the ring light case glowing, live streaming to her 100,000 followers. "Oh my God! You guys!" she cooed, her voice pitching up into that fake, sugary influencer register I knew so well. "I told you I was going to do a little charity tour today. Look who we found playing in the mud." She panned the camera directly at me. I froze. The instinct was visceral. I wanted to hide. I wanted to dive behind the stack of drywall. I was dirty, sweaty, and exhausted, and she was pristine. "Mackenzie," she chirped, stepping over a pile of debris with exaggerated care. "Say hi to the stream. Everyone has been asking where you disappeared to. I told them you were finding yourself." She brought the phone closer, zooming in on my face, then panning down to my muddy boots. "See, guys," she said to the screen, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "This is why we listen to Daddy. You make bad choices. You get cut off, and you end up begging for scraps on a construction site. It is a total cautionary tale. So sad." "Sloane," I said, my voice low. "Get that camera out of my face." "Oh, don't be bitter, Kenzie," she laughed, checking her viewfinder. "I am just showing reality. You look like you work hard. For someone else." She laughed again, a light, tinkling sound that made the blood roar in my ears. She spent another 5 minutes wandering the site, treating the half-built homes for single mothers like a petting zoo of poverty, making faces at the unfinished plumbing, and using my humiliation as content fodder. Then, as quickly as she appeared, she got bored. She blew a kiss to the camera, climbed back into her convertible, and drove off, leaving me standing in the dust. The fallout was immediate. By the time I got back to the job trailer, my phone, which usually sat silent all day, was buzzing against the plywood desk. The video had hit Northbridge social circles like a bomb. I opened Instagram against my better judgment. The screenshots were already everywhere. From Park Avenue to plywood. One caption read, "Guess the trust fund finally ran dry," said another. There was a side-by-side photo collage someone had made. On the left, me at the Christmas party 2 years ago, wearing vintage Chanel and holding a glass of champagne. On the right, a screen grab from Sloane's video, me looking sweaty, angry, and covered in filth, staring down the lens like a trapped animal. The comments were worse. "She looks rough. That is what happens when you bite the hand that feeds you. Karma is a bitch, and apparently, so is manual labor." I sat in the trailer, the air conditioning rattling overhead, and felt a familiar sensation. It was the same shrinking feeling I had felt at the gate on Christmas Eve. The desire to vanish, to delete every account, throw the phone in the cement mixer, and crawl into a hole. I was about to power the phone down when a text message popped up at the top of the screen. It was from Eleanor. It was just a link to Sloane's video, followed by a single line of text. "Remind me, Mackenzie, what did you used to do for a living?" I stared at the words. What did I used to do? I was a PR strategist. I fixed things. I took messy, ugly narratives, and I spun them until they looked like gold. I had spent 3 years cleaning up the messes of tech CEOs and minor celebrities. I knew how the news cycle worked. I knew that the court of public opinion didn't care about truth. It cared about the story. Sloane had told a story. The fallen princess wallowing in the mud. But she had made a fatal error. She had assumed that the mud was something to be ashamed of. I stood up. I walked over to the small, dirty mirror hanging on the back of the trailer door. I looked at myself, the grease on my cheek, the sweat-matted hair, the exhaustion in my eyes. I didn't wipe the grease off. I didn't fix my hair. I pulled out my phone. I didn't set up a ring light. I didn't put on a filter. I held the camera slightly shaky, handheld, raw. I hit record. "Hi," I said. My voice wasn't sugary. It was tired. It was real. "You might have seen a video of me today. My sister came by to visit. She seemed pretty concerned about my boots." I flipped the camera to show my muddy, steel-toed Timberlands. Then I flipped it back to my face. She called this a cautionary tale. And you know what? She is right. But not about me. I walked out of the trailer, keeping the camera rolling. I walked straight into Unit 4. The sun was setting, casting long golden shadows through the framed walls. "This is Unit 4, I said, panning the camera around the rough carpentry. "In 3 weeks, this won't be a construction site. It is going to be a home for a woman named Sarah and her 2 sons. Sarah works 2 jobs and has been sleeping on her sister's couch for 8 months. I walked to the window frame, looking out at the other 19 units rising from the dirt. My sister laughed because I was dirty. She laughed because I work for a living now. She thinks that is shameful. She thinks that having a trust fund makes you better than the people who build your houses." I leaned into the camera. I let them see the pores, the sweat, the anger. If building a roof over a family's head makes me a failure in Northbridge, then I am glad I failed. I would rather have dirt under my fingernails than have hands that have never done a damn thing for anyone else. I paused. "We are short $50,000 to finish the roof on Unit 6 before the rains come next month. If you want to laugh at me, go ahead. But if you want to help Sarah get her keys, the link is in my bio." I stopped recording. I didn't overthink it. I posted it to my dead Instagram account, tagged Heartlight, and tagged Sloane. Then I tossed the phone on the desk and went back to work. When I checked it 3 hours later, the world had inverted. The internet is a strange, volatile beast. It loves a villain, but it loves an underdog even more. And nothing triggers the collective rage of the working class faster than a rich girl in white mocking someone in work boots. Sloane's video had been stitched, a feature where users respond to a clip, thousands of times, but they weren't mocking me anymore. A mechanic in Ohio stitched it, showing his grease-covered hands. I guess I am a cautionary tale too. A nurse in scrubs stitched it, looking exhausted after a 12-hour shift, proud to be a failure like Mackenzie. My video had caught the algorithm's wave. It had jumped from Instagram to TikTok to Twitter. The hashtag Dirty Hands was trending. People were dissecting Sloane. They were zooming in on her disgusted expression, mocking her tone, turning her into the face of out-of-touch privilege. She had become the villain in her own movie. And the money? I opened the donation portal for Horizon Haven. The goal bar, which had been creeping along for months, was full. $50,000, $60,000, $75,000. The donations were small, $10, $20, $5. They were coming from real people, people who knew what it was like to work, people who hated girls like Sloane. By the next morning, we had raised $120,000. I walked onto the site at 6 a.m, coffee in hand. The atmosphere was different. Usually, the crew ignored me or gave me polite, distant nods. Today, as I walked past the framing team, the foreman, a guy named Rick, who had never said more than 2 words to me, stopped his saw. He looked at me. He looked at his own dirty boots. Then he tipped his hard hat. "Morning, boss," he said. It wasn't sarcastic. It was respect. I walked into the trailer to find Marcus smiling. He didn't say anything. He just pointed to the computer screen where the donation total was still climbing. But the real victory came that evening, in Eleanor's office. She didn't hug me. She didn't pop champagne. She slid a thick manila folder across her glass desk. "You did well," she said. Her voice was level. "You didn't let the emotion drown you. You used the momentum of her attack to throw her over your shoulder. That is judo, Mackenzie, not PR." It felt good, I admitted, to see everyone turning on her. "Careful," Eleanor warned. "The internet's love is as fickle as its hate. Do not get addicted to the applause. That is Sloane's drug, not yours. We care about the result. The result is that Unit 6 gets a roof." She tapped the folder. "Inside here are screenshots of every nasty comment Sloane liked, every mock video she made, every caption. I had the team archive them before she went private an hour ago." "She went private?" I asked, a smile tugging at the corner of my mouth. "She had to. The comment section was eating her alive," Eleanor said. "Keep this folder, right now. It is just petty drama. But in 6 months, or a year, when we are ready to make our final move against the family, this will be evidence of character. This establishes a pattern of malice. It is ammunition. Put it in your safe." I took the folder. It felt heavy. For the first time since Christmas, I didn't feel like I was reacting. I wasn't just dodging blows. I had thrown one, and I had landed it. I looked out the window at the city skyline. Somewhere out there, in the big mansion on the hill, Sloane was probably crying. Douglas was probably screaming at his PR team, and Vivian was probably drinking a very large gin and tonic. They had tried to bury me. They forgot that I was a seed. "What is next?" I asked, turning back to Eleanor. "Next," Eleanor said, opening a set of blueprints. "We need to talk about the electrical grid for the community center, and then we are going to look at your father's tax returns for the last 5 years." I sat down, I opened my notebook, and for the first time, I didn't just want to learn. I wanted to hunt. The romance of the construction site, the honest sweat, the smell of sawdust, the viral victory over my sister, faded the moment I stepped into the climate-controlled silence of the Heartlight Secure Archives. Here, the air was dry and smelled of ozone from the high-speed scanners. It was a place where truths were not shouted on Instagram, but whispered in the margins of balance sheets. I was supposed to be preparing the quarterly risk assessment for the Horizon Haven project. Instead, for the past 6 hours, Marcus and I had been dissecting the corpse of a company called Lane Ridge Ventures. "It is a shell game," Marcus said, rubbing his eyes. He pushed a stack of property deeds across the table toward me. Look at the dates. Mackenzie, look at the collateral. I picked up the documents, my eyes, now trained to spot anomalies in a contractor's invoice from 50 yards away, scanned the fine print. He mortgaged the commercial property in downtown Northbridge, I said, tracing the line with my pen. Then he used that mortgage as collateral to secure a line of credit from a regional bank in Oregon. Then he used that line of credit to put a down payment on the vacation home in Aspen. Keep going, Marcus said grimly. Then he took out a second lien on the Aspen house to pay the interest on the Northbridge mortgage. I looked up, feeling a cold knot tighten in my stomach. He is paying debt with debt. There is no actual revenue. It is just money moving in a circle. And every time it moves, he skims a little off the top to pay for the country club and the cars. And to pay for Sloane's $55 million trust fund, Marcus added, which, if my math is right, is currently funded by absolutely nothing but air and promises. The door opened, and a man walked in. This was Arthur Pym, Heartlight's forensic accountant. Arthur was a man who looked like he had been born wearing a gray suit. He didn't smile. He didn't make small talk. He treated fraud with the same clinical detachment a coroner treats a body. He placed a single sheet of paper on the table. I analyzed the signature on the $600,000 loan guarantee. Arthur said. His voice was dry as dust. It is a high-quality forgery, but that is not the interesting part. What is the interesting part? I asked. The interesting part is that I found your mother's signature on a similar document from 2 years ago, and your grandmother's signature, God rest her soul, on a deed transfer from 5 years ago. I stared at him. He forged Mom's signature too? Douglas does not discriminate, Arthur said. He uses people as heat shields. When he needs liquidity, he creates a liability, but he never puts his own name on the line if he can help it. He assigns the risk to the people closest to him because he knows they are the least likely to sue him. You were not special, Mackenzie. You were just the next available asset with a clean credit score. I felt the blood drain from my face. I had spent months thinking this was personal. I thought Douglas hated me, but this was worse than hate. This was indifference. To him. I wasn't a daughter he was disappointed in. I was just a line of credit he hadn't tapped yet. I was a resource to be mined until I was empty, then discarded. It gets worse, Marcus said. He pulled up a grainy photo on his tablet. It showed my father sitting on the terrace of a restaurant in the city. He was leaning forward, laughing, holding a glass of wine. Opposite him was a man with slicked back hair and a smile that looked too wide for his face. Who is that? I asked. That is Victor Hale, Marcus said, CEO of Aurora Nexus Capital. I remembered the name. Eleanor had mentioned it the night she picked me up. The Ponzi scheme. My source says they have been meeting weekly, Marcus continued. Douglas is not just an investor. Mackenzie, he is bringing his friends in. He is recruiting. He is telling everyone at the club that Victor Hale is a genius who can double their money in 6 months. He is feeding them to the wolves, I whispered. He believes the hype, Arthur corrected. Men like your father always think they are the exception. He thinks he is the shark, but he is just the bait. The door opened again, and this time Eleanor walked in. She wasn't alone. Beside her was a woman in a nondescript navy pantsuit with a badge clipped to her belt. She didn't introduce herself, but she didn't have to. The Federal Bureau of Investigation radiates a very specific energy. We know about Aurora Nexus, the agent said, skipping the pleasantries. We have been watching Victor Hale for 18 months. Then arrest him, I said, standing up. My chair scraped loudly against the floor. Arrest Victor. Arrest my father. You have the forgery. You have the trail. It is not that simple, the agent said calmly. Aurora Nexus is a billion-dollar house of cards. If we move now, we catch Victor on a few minor securities violations. He gets a fine, maybe 2 years in a minimum security camp, and the money, hundreds of millions of dollars from teachers, pension funds, and retirees, disappears into offshore accounts we can never touch. She placed her hands on the table. We need him to overreach. We need Victor to solicit a massive influx of cash for a specific, non-existent project. That creates the wire fraud charges that put him away for life. And it gives us a window to freeze the assets before they vanish. And my father? I asked. Douglas Lane is currently the primary funnel for that new cash, Eleanor said. Her voice was steady, warning me to listen. He is trying to raise $4 million to buy a platinum tier position in Aurora Nexus. If he transfers that money, he cements the case against Hale. But that is fraud, I argued, looking between Eleanor and the agent. He is raising that money by stealing. He stole my name. He is probably stealing from my mother right now. If I stay silent, I am complicit. If you speak up, Eleanor cut in, sharp and cold. What happens, Mackenzie? I save people, I said. No, Eleanor said. If you go to the police today about the forgery, Douglas will not go to jail. He will claim he had verbal permission. He will claim you are having a mental breakdown. He has been planting that seed for years, hasn't he? The emotional daughter, the failure. He will show the court the video of you screaming at the gate. He will paint you as unstable, vindictive, and desperate for attention. She walked over to me, forcing me to look her in the eye. His lawyers will tie you up in court for 5 years. Meanwhile, he will get spooked. He will pull his money out of Aurora Nexus. Victor Hale will catch wind of the investigation and flee the country. The investors lose everything. And you? You end up with a ruined reputation and a father who is still rich and now actively hunting you. I slumped back into my chair. The logic was a cage, and I was trapped inside it. So I have to do nothing, I said bitterly. I have to let him commit a crime. You have to let him make his choice, the agent said. We are not asking you to help him. We are asking you not to stop him from jumping off the cliff he walked to on his own. The room went silent. I looked at the forgery again. Mackenzie A. Hoffman. I thought about the night at the gate. I thought about the cold. I thought about the way he looked at me when he told the security guard to take my keys. He didn't hesitate. He didn't care if I froze. He didn't care if I starved. Why was I trying to save him? Because I was still playing by the rules of a family that didn't exist. I was still trying to be the good daughter, but the good daughter was the one who signed the loans. The good daughter was the victim. If I wanted to win, I had to stop being the daughter. I had to become the witness. I took a deep breath. The air in the room felt thinner, sharper. He loves leverage, I said quietly. Everyone looked at me. Douglas, I explained. His entire philosophy is leverage. He thinks using your own money is for suckers. He believes that if you are not risking everything, you are not trying hard enough. He calls it maximum exposure. I looked at Marcus. If he is trying to raise $4 million for Victor Hale, he won't just look for cash. He will look for assets he can liquidate quickly. He will look for things he thinks no one is watching. The trust, Marcus said. Sloane's trust. He can't touch the principle of the trust, I said, but he can borrow against the projected interest if the trustee approves it. And who is the trustee? Arthur asked. Colin Mercer, I said. His assistant, the man who took my car keys. I stood up and walked to the whiteboard. I picked up a black marker. I felt a strange sense of calm settling over me. It was the calm of a surgeon who has decided to amputate a limb to save the body. I am not going to warn him, I said, and I am not going to stop him. I looked at the FBI agent. But if you want him to transfer that money, you need to know his schedule. Douglas is superstitious. He only makes big transfers on Tuesdays because he thinks it is his lucky day. And he always waits until the market closes on the East Coast. I turned to Eleanor. I can predict his moves. I know which accounts he will drain first. I know how he hides the transactions. I will give you everything. I will annotate every bank statement, every email, every text message you intercept. I will build the paper trail so thick that not even his high-priced lawyers can cut through it. You are willing to testify? The agent asked. Against your father? I am not testifying against my father, I said, capping the marker with a solid click. I am testifying against a man who stole my identity. The fact that we share DNA is a biological accident that I'm correcting. Eleanor nodded. It was a small, precise movement. Good, she said. Marcus, give the agent the encrypted drive with the preliminary findings. Mackenzie, you have work to do. If Douglas is looking for $4 million, he's going to start getting desperate. We need to be ready to catch everything that falls when he starts shaking the tree. I walked out of the archive room. I didn't feel guilty. I didn't feel sad. I felt a cold, hard clarity. I wasn't holding the knife. I wasn't pushing him. I was simply standing aside and letting gravity do its job. Douglas Lane had spent his whole life climbing on top of other people to get higher. He was about to learn that the higher you climb, the longer you have to fall. And I would be there at the bottom, not to catch him, but to measure the impact. The courier looked like he had taken a wrong turn into a war zone. He was standing in the doorway of my shipping container office at Horizon Haven, clutching a thick cream-colored envelope against his chest, eyeing the mud on his pristine sneakers with deep suspicion. Outside, a generator was roaring, and the framing crew was shouting over the sound of pneumatic nail guns. Inside, it was just me, a lukewarm cup of coffee, and a pile of invoices. "Mackenzie Hoffman?" he asked, his nose wrinkling slightly at the smell of wet sawdust. "That is me," I said, not looking up from the blueprint I was redlining. "You have been served." He dropped the envelope onto my desk as if it were contaminated, turned on his heel, and fled back to the safety of the pavement. I picked up the packet. It was heavy. The return address was Sterling. Vance and Associates, the most aggressive litigation firm in the city. I slid a letter opener under the wax seal. Douglas always did love a dramatic wax seal, and pulled out the documents. Plaintiff, Douglas Lane, acting on behalf of Lane Ridge Ventures. Defendant, Mackenzie A. Hoffman. Cause of action, breach of non-disclosure agreement. I laughed. It was a dry, humorless sound that startled the fly buzzing against the window. I flipped to page 3. The lawsuit alleged that during my time volunteering for the family company 4 years ago, I had accessed proprietary trade secrets regarding land acquisition strategies and had recently shared them with a direct competitor, implied to be Heartlight. It was fiction, pure, unadulterated fantasy. My role at Lane Ridge Ventures back then had been fetching coffee and organizing the Christmas card list. I had never seen a land acquisition strategy in my life until Eleanor taught me. Then I saw the demand. Compensatory damages, $120,000. I froze. My finger hovered over the number, $120,000. It was such a specific number. It wasn't the round million a lawyer would usually demand for a breach of contract case to scare the defendant. It was precise. It was desperate. I pulled out my phone and called Marcus. "Check the Aurora Nexus prospectus," I said, skipping the hello. "The tiered investment structure. What is the fee to upgrade from a gold partner to a platinum partner?" I heard the rapid clicking of a keyboard on the other end. "Give me a second," Marcus muttered. "Okay, here it is. To unlock the platinum tier, which grants access to the high-yield offshore arbitrage funds, you need a total investment of $4 million. But there is also a non-refundable administrative buy-in fee required to process the upgrade." "How much is the fee, Marcus?" $120,000, he said. I leaned back in my chair, the lawsuit resting on my chest. Douglas didn't care about the NDA. He didn't care about trade secrets. He was tapped out. He had scraped together the $4 million from God knows where, probably by leveraging the trust fund. But he had forgotten about the administrative fee. He was short exactly $120,000 to close the deal that would ruin him. And he had decided I was going to pay it. "He is using the legal system as an ATM," I said quietly. "He assumes I will be terrified of a lawsuit. He assumes I will call him crying. And he will graciously agree to drop the suit if I just write him a check for the damages to show I am sorry." "I will send our legal team," Marcus said, his voice dropping an octave, becoming dangerous. "We can crush this. Mackenzie, it is a frivolous suit. We can file a motion to dismiss, countersue for harassment, and depose him until he bleeds." "No," I said. Mackenzie, we can win this in a month. I don't have a month, I said, looking at the date on the calendar. The Aurora Nexus buy-in window closes on Friday. If Douglas doesn't get this money by Friday, he can't transfer the $4 million. If he doesn't transfer the $4 million, he doesn't commit the wire fraud that sends him to federal prison. You want to pay him? Marcus sounded horrified. Set up a settlement meeting, I said. Tomorrow morning. Tell his lawyers I'm terrified. Tell them I want to settle immediately for the full amount. The conference room at Sterling. Vance and Associates was designed to intimidate. It had a view of the entire city, a table long enough to land a plane on, and air conditioning set to a temperature that I am sure was meant to lower your body temperature and your resolve. I sat on one side, alone. I had told Hartlight's lawyers to wait in the lobby. I wanted to do this myself. The door opened, and the Lane family made their entrance. Douglas led the way, wearing a suit that cost more than the settlement he was demanding. He looked energized, his cheeks flushed with the thrill of the hunt. Vivian was next, wearing a black dress and oversized sunglasses, playing the role of the grieving mother forced to discipline a wayward child. Sloane brought up the rear, scrolling on her phone, looking bored but smug. They sat opposite me, 3 against 1, just like always. Mackenzie, Douglas said, placing his hands on the table. He used his disappointed father voice. I take no pleasure in this, none at all. But business is business. You signed an agreement. You broke trust. There have to be consequences. We tried to protect you, Vivian sighed, dabbing at a dry eye with a lace handkerchief. But you have become so reckless. Can we hurry this up? Sloane asked, popping a piece of gum. I have a nail appointment at 2. I looked at them. I looked at the people who had raised me, the people who had thrown me out into the snow, the people who were now trying to extort me because they were too incompetent to manage their own greed. I didn't feel angry. I didn't feel sad. I felt like I was watching a nature documentary about a species that was going extinct and didn't know it yet. I reached into my bag and pulled out the settlement agreement my lawyer had drafted. It was 1 page. Simple. I admit no wrongdoing, but I agreed to pay the sum to avoid litigation. I have the check, I said. Douglas blinked. He had prepared a speech. He had prepared to watch me beg, to watch me cry about how unfair this was, so he could lecture me about responsibility. My instant surrender threw him off his rhythm. You have the check? He stammered. Certified bank draft, I said, sliding the piece of paper across the polished mahogany. $120,000, payable to Lane Ridge Ventures. Douglas picked it up. His greedy eyes scanned the numbers. He couldn't help himself. A small, triumphant smile twitched at the corner of his mouth. He thought he had broken me. He thought I was paying because I was afraid of him. Well, he said, clearing his throat and trying to regain his composure, I am glad to see you are finally taking responsibility for your actions. Mackenzie, it shows growth. Just sign the release, Douglas, I said. My voice was flat. He signed. He pushed the paper back to me. We are doing this for your own good, Vivian added, as if the check were a donation to charity and not a ransom payment. Someday, you will thank us for teaching you accountability. I stood up. I picked up the release form. Are we done? I asked. We are done, Douglas said. Tucking the check into his breast pocket, he patted it. He looked like a cat that had just eaten the canary. Don't be a stranger. Mackenzie, if you ever want to come back to the fold, well, we can talk, once you have learned your lesson. I didn't say goodbye. I walked out of the room, down the long corridor, and into the elevator. As the doors closed, my phone buzzed. It was a screenshot from Marcus. He had hacked into the Lane family's private group chat. Douglas had posted a message 30 seconds ago. Douglas, just left the meeting. She folded like a cheap suit. Check is in hand. Finally. The girl understands her position in the food chain. Daddy always wins. Sloane, LOL. Did she cry? Douglas, she was too scared to cry. Easy money. Transferring to Aurora now. I walked out of the building and into the bright, harsh sunlight of the city. I walked to my car, a sensible sedan I had bought with my own salary, and sat in the driver's seat. I took a deep breath. I pulled up the tracking software Marcus had installed on my phone. It was linked to the flagged account numbers for Lila Revenge Ventures. I watched the screen. 1:14 p.m. Deposit, $120,000. Source, Mackenzie Hoffman. 1:17 p.m. Wire transfer, initiated, $4,120,000. Source. Destination, Aurora Nexus Capital. Cayman Islands, Holdings. It was done. Douglas hadn't just taken my money. He had taken the bait. He had combined my clean money with his leveraged money and sent it all across federal lines into a criminal enterprise. He had just signed his name to a wire fraud charge that carried a mandatory minimum sentence of 20 years. He thought I had paid him a settlement. I looked at the building towering above me, imagining Douglas up there, popping champagne, thinking he was the smartest man in the room. "I didn't pay you a settlement, Dad," I whispered to the empty car. "I paid for the rope." I put the car in gear and drove back to the construction site. I had a roof to finish, and unlike my father, I preferred to build things that wouldn't collapse the moment the wind changed. The finishing touches on Horizon Haven were being applied. The scent of fresh paint and drying drywall hung in the air, a perfume of progress that I had come to prefer over any expensive fragrance. It was a Tuesday morning, crisp and bright, the kind of day that felt efficient. I was sitting in my glass-walled office at Heartlight headquarters, reviewing the final occupancy permits, when the door opened. Marcus did not knock. He did not smile. He walked in with the urgency of a man who has just watched a building collapse. "Turn on the news," he said. I picked up the remote and flicked on the monitor mounted on the wall. The screen filled with the chaotic, shaky footage of a pre-dawn raid. Men in FBI windbreakers were carrying boxes out of a sleek glass office building in downtown Manhattan. A ticker at the bottom of the screen flashed red. Federal agents raid Aurora Nexus Capital. CEO Victor Hale arrested on charges of wire fraud and embezzlement. Assets frozen. My phone on the desk lit up, then it lit up again, then it began to vibrate continuously, a steady hum of catastrophe. "They took Hale into custody at 6 this morning," Marcus said, his voice grim but satisfied. "The SEC halted trading on the fund immediately. They are estimating the losses at over $1 billion. I watched the screen. A reporter was standing in front of the building, reading a list of high-profile investors who were likely to lose everything. "The initial list of victims includes several pension funds," the reporter said breathlessly, "as well as private investment firms such as Lila Revenge Ventures." There it was, my father's name, broadcast to the nation, tethered to a sinking ship. "It is over," I said softly. "Not yet," Marcus warned. "The reception desk just called. Security is trying to hold them back, but they are making a scene. They are demanding to see you." "Let them up," I said. I stood up, smoothed the front of my blazer, and walked around my desk. But then I stopped. I remembered the power dynamics of the last 26 years. I remembered standing while Douglas sat. I remembered looking up while he looked down. I went back to my chair. I sat down. I clasped my hands on the leather desk pad. I waited. When the elevator doors opened, Douglas, Vivian, and Sloane spilled into the hallway. They did not look like the titans of Northbridge society today. Douglas was wearing a suit, but his tie was crooked, and there was a sheen of sweat on his forehead that the air conditioning could not fix. Vivian looked pale, her makeup applied with a shaking hand. Sloane looked like a cornered animal, clutching her phone as if it were a weapon. They burst into my office. Douglas marched straight to the chair opposite my desk, but he didn't sit. He leaned over it, placing his knuckles on the wood. "We need to talk," he said. His voice was loud, booming, trying to fill the room with an authority he no longer possessed. "Hello to you too, Dad," I said. I didn't stand up. I didn't offer them water. I didn't smile. "We don't have time for games, Mackenzie," Vivian snapped, throwing herself onto the sofa. "This is a crisis." "I saw the news," I said calmly. "It looks like Victor Hale is in a lot of trouble." "Victor Hale is a crook," Douglas shouted, slamming his hand on the desk. He lied to us. He lied to everyone. But that is a matter for the courts. Right now, we have a temporary liquidity issue. A liquidity issue, I repeated. The freeze on the fund has triggered a margin call on the Northbridge house, Douglas said, the words tumbling out fast. It is a technicality. The bank gets nervous when they see the news. They are threatening an accelerated foreclosure clause if we don't post a bridge bond by close of business today. He took a breath, trying to slow his heart rate. He forced a smile. It was a ghastly thing. We need a short-term loan, Mackenzie, from Heartlight, just a bridge, $3.8 million. We will pay it back with interest as soon as the lawyers untangle the Aurora assets. I stared at him. He was asking for $3.8 million, the exact amount of the mortgage he had taken out to gamble on the fraud. You want Heartlight to lend you nearly $4 million? I said. To save a house you kicked me out of. This isn't about the past, Vivian cried out, her voice shrill. This is about family. We are your blood. Mackenzie, you cannot let strangers take our home. You cannot let your parents be put out on the street like criminals. Like I was? I asked. On Christmas Eve? With one suitcase? That was tough love, Douglas barked. And look at you. It worked. You are a director now. You are successful. We made you who you are. Sloane stepped forward. She held up her phone. The camera lens was pointed at me. Cut the crap, Sloane hissed. Here is how this goes. Mackenzie, you cut the check, or I go live. Right now. I have 200,000 followers. I will tell them that the CEO of Heartlight is letting her elderly parents lose their home while she sits in a glass tower. I will paint you as the most heartless, vindictive bitch in the state. Do you think your donors will like that? I looked at the phone. Then I looked at Sloane. Go ahead, I said. Sloane blinked. What? Go live, I said. Tell them. Sloane hesitated. She wasn't used to people calling her bluff. I will do it, she threatened, her thumb hovering over the button. While you are doing that, I said, turning my gaze back to Douglas, let's talk about the timeline. I opened a file folder on my desk. You needed $4 million to buy into the platinum tier of Aurora Nexus, I said. You leveraged the house. You leveraged the trust. But you were short. You were short exactly $120,000 for the buy-in fee. Douglas went very still. You sued me, I continued, my voice steady and surgical. You concocted a fake lawsuit about an NDA breach to extort the last $120,000 from me, and I paid it. I gave you the check. That was a settlement, Douglas sputtered. You admitted liability. I admitted nothing, I corrected. I gave you a check, and 17 minutes later, you wired that money, my money, along with the $4 million, directly to Victor Hale. I slid a piece of paper across the desk. It was the transaction log Marcus had tracked. You didn't just lose money. Dad, you used funds obtained from me to facilitate a wire transfer to a known criminal enterprise. If I speak to the FBI, that makes me a witness. If I give you $3 million now to cover up the loss, that makes me an accomplice to money laundering. You tracked the money? Douglas whispered. His face was turning the color of ash. I tracked everything, I said. I pulled out a second document. I also tracked this. I placed the $600,000 loan guarantee on the table, the one with my forged signature. You took out a loan in my name. Dad, you forged my signature. You set me up to take the fall for Lane Ridge Ventures. Vivian gasped. She put a hand to her mouth. Douglas, you said she signed it. She did, Douglas lied, but his eyes were darting around the room, looking for an exit. She is lying. She is trying to frame me. We have a forensic handwriting analysis confirming it is a forgery, I said. And we have Arthur Pym ready to testify that this is your standard operating procedure. I looked at Sloane, who had lowered her phone. And you, I said, sliding a stack of printed screenshots toward her. You want to talk about public opinion? Here is a collection of every time you mock the poor, Every time you called working people peasants, and the text messages in your family group chat where you laughed about squeezing me for the settlement money. I leaned back in my chair. If you go live, Sloan, I release this file to the press, I release the forgery to the district attorney, and I release the transaction logs to the FBI agent who is currently sitting in the lobby waiting for my signal. The silence that fell over the room was heavy. It was the sound of a guillotine blade hanging suspended in the air. Douglas collapsed into the chair. His legs gave out. He looked old. Suddenly, undeniably old. "Mackenzie," he rasped. "Please, they will take the house. It is the Lane legacy. It is all we have." "It is a building," I said. "You told me that buildings are assets. You told me that if you can't pay for it, you don't deserve it." "I am your father," he whispered. Tears were forming in his eyes. Real tears? Or just the panic of a man realizing the game is over? It didn't matter anymore. "I made a mistake. I got greedy. But I did it for the family. Help me, please, just this once." I looked at them. The father who had seen me as a credit score, the mother who had seen me as a burden, the sister who had seen me as a punchline. I felt a strange sensation in my chest. It wasn't triumph. It was release, the final tether snapping. "I did help you, Dad," I said softly. Douglas looked up, hope flickering in his eyes. "I paid the settlement," I said. "I gave you exactly what you asked for. You wanted the money to make the deal. I gave it to you. You wanted to jump into the deep end with Victor Hale. I didn't stop you." I stood up then. I towered over them. Not because I was tall, but because they were small. "I didn't push you into Aurora Nexus," I said, my voice ringing with a clarity that cut through the room. "And I didn't beg you to destroy yourself. I simply handed you the rope you asked for. You are the one who tied the knot. You are the one who jumped." "Mackenzie," Vivian sobbed. "Security will escort you out," I said. I pressed the button on my intercom. "Marcus, they are leaving." The door opened. 2 uniformed guards stood there. Douglas stood up shakily. He looked at me one last time. There was no anger left in his face, just the terrifying realization that he had underestimated the one person he should have feared the most. "You planned this," he whispered. "You knew." "I learned from the best," I said. They walked out. Sloan didn't look back. Vivian was weeping into her hands. Douglas walked like a ghost. When the door clicked shut, the silence returned to the office. It was a clean silence. Marcus walked in a moment later. "The FBI agent is asking if we are ready to hand over the transaction logs," he said. "Give them everything," I said. "Every email, every text, every bank statement." I walked to the window and looked down at the street. I watched 3 small figures exit the building and get into a car that, by tomorrow morning, would likely belong to the bank. I didn't feel happy, but I felt light. The weight of their expectations, their cruelty, and their name was finally gone. I turned back to my desk. I had a community center to finish building, and unlike the Lane legacy, this one was going to last. The calendar has a cruel sense of symmetry. Exactly 365 days ago, I stood on the wrong side of a wrought iron gate, shivering in a polyester blazer while my family toasted to their own magnificence inside a warm mansion. Tonight, the Earth has completed its orbit, but the axis of my world has flipped entirely. The Grand Hall of the new Heartlight headquarters, a restored bank building from the 1920s, was filled with a golden, honeyed light. It was the kind of warmth you could feel in your marrow. A jazz trio was playing something soft and intricate in the corner, the upright bass thumping gently against the hum of conversation. Waiters moved through the crowd carrying trays of hors d'oeuvres that smelled of roasted fig and goat cheese. I stood near a towering arrangement of white hydrangeas, holding a glass of sparkling cider. I was not wearing sequins. I was not wearing a gown designed to scream for attention. I wore a simple, slate-gray evening dress with long sleeves and a high neck. The only jewelry I wore was a small, silver pin on my lapel, the Heartlight insignia, a lighthouse beam cutting through fog. It was a gift from Eleanor, given to me an hour ago with a rare, genuine smile. The room was a tapestry of the people we had brought together. To my left, the mayor was laughing at a joke told by Sarah, the first resident to move into Horizon Haven. To my right, a hedge fund manager was listening intently to a young mother explaining how the new on-site daycare allowed her to finish her nursing degree. It was a room where money was not a weapon, but a tool. I took a sip of cider, letting the peace of the moment wash over me. For the first time in a year, my shoulders were not tense. Then I felt a presence at my elbow. It was Marcus. He was wearing a tuxedo that fit him perfectly, but his posture had shifted from guest to bodyguard. His face was a mask of professional neutrality, but I saw the tightness around his eyes. "We have a situation at the main entrance," he said quietly, leaning down so only I could hear. "Is it the press?" I asked, keeping my voice even. "No," Marcus said. "It is the lanes." My hand tightened slightly on the glass stem. "All of them?" "Douglas, Vivian, and Sloane. They are currently arguing with the security team. They do not have invitations. Douglas is claiming that it is a misunderstanding, that they are here to surprise you. He told the head of security that he is here to facilitate introductions with your donors." I looked at Marcus. "They want to network?" "They are desperate, Mackenzie," Marcus said. "The foreclosure on the Northbridge house was finalized 3 days ago. They are currently staying in a motel off the interstate. They think if they can get into this room, they can find a backer, someone to float them a loan based on the old name." He held out his tablet. "Do you want to see?" I hesitated. Part of me wanted to say no. Part of me wanted to stay in the warmth and pretend they didn't exist. But the other part of me, the part that had been forged in the ice of last Christmas, needed to verify the reality. I took the tablet. The feed was from the external security camera mounted above the bronze doors. The image was high definition, black and white, cutting through the gloom of the night. It was raining outside, a mix of rain and sleet, just like last year. Douglas was standing near the velvet rope. He was wearing his tuxedo, but in the harsh light of the security camera, it looked sad. The lapels were limp, wet with rain. He was pointing a finger at the large security guard, a gesture of entitlement I knew so well, jabbering something aggressive. He still thought he could order the world to open for him. Vivian was standing behind him. She was clutching her old mink coat, the one she used to wear to the opera, but now she was huddled inside it, her hair flattened by the damp air, her face pale and pinched. She looked small. And Sloane was off to the side, holding her phone up. She was trying to film the interaction, panning the camera from the guard to the lit windows of the hall, but her hand was shaking. She wasn't filming for content anymore. She was filming for leverage, trying to find an angle, any angle, that made them look like victims. I handed the tablet back to Marcus. "They are on the permanent exclusion list," I said. My voice did not tremble. "No exceptions." "I know," Marcus said. "I will have them removed." "Wait," I said. I looked at the table of food nearby. I looked at the abundance. Then I thought about the 3 vouchers I had seen on Marcus's desk earlier that day. "Don't just remove them," I said. "It is Christmas Eve. Heartlight is a charitable organization. We do not turn away the hungry." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "Give them 3 vouchers for the St. Jude's Soup Kitchen," I said. "The one on 4th Street. We sponsor the meal service there tonight. It is hot food. It is shelter. It is exactly what they need." A flicker of understanding passed through Marcus's eyes. "Understood. I will watch from the mezzanine," I said. I walked away from the party, slipping through a side door and climbing the marble staircase to the mezzanine level. This area was dark, separated from the street below by a massive wall of glass that stretched 20 feet high. I walked to the edge of the glass. Down below, on the wet concrete sidewalk, the scene was playing out in silence. The glass was soundproof, thick enough to block out the city noise, the wind, and the pleading. I saw Marcus step out from the main doors. He opened a large black umbrella, creating a dry circle around himself. He walked up to Douglas. Douglas straightened up when he saw Marcus. I could see his mouth moving. He was smiling that salesperson smile, extending a hand, probably expecting to be ushered in, probably thinking I had sent Marcus to retrieve them. Marcus did not shake his hand. Instead, Marcus reached into his jacket pocket. He pulled out 3 slips of paper. They were bright yellow, the standard color for the emergency meal vouchers. He held them out. I saw Douglas stop. I saw his eyes focus on the yellow paper. I saw the realization hit him like a physical blow. He recoiled. He waved his hands, pointing up at the building, shouting something that I couldn't hear, but I could read the body language. "Do you know who I am?" Marcus didn't move. He simply held the vouchers steady. He said something brief. Then he pointed down the street, toward the bus line that would take them to the shelter. Vivian stepped forward. She grabbed Douglas's arm. She was looking at the vouchers not with pride, but with hunger. She whispered something to him. Douglas looked up. His eyes scanned the building. He looked at the golden light spilling from the windows, and then his gaze traveled up. He saw me. I was standing in the shadows of the mezzanine, but the light from the street lamp caught my face. I was looking down at him. For a moment, time suspended. 1 year ago, he had looked down at me from the warm foyer while I stood in the freezing rain. Now, the geometry of our lives had inverted. Douglas took a step toward the glass. He pressed his hand against the wet surface, leaving a ghostly palm print. He opened his mouth. He mouthed words, exaggerated and slow, hoping I would read his lips. "Please." Then more words. "Your mother? Family." He looked pathetic. He looked like a man drowning in a tank, banging on the walls. I didn't step closer. I didn't touch the glass. I just stood there, my hands clasped loosely in front of me. I felt no urge to open the door. I felt no urge to save him. The check I had written him months ago was the last transaction we would ever have. Behind him, the weather turned. The rain shifted into hail, bouncing off the pavement like white sparks. Vivian shrieked silently, pulling the fur coat over her head. The cold was biting now, the same cold that had eaten into my bones when I walked 3 miles to Ridgeline. Sloane lowered her phone. She looked at the screen, then at the building. She realized, perhaps for the first time, that the lens couldn't protect her from the temperature. There was no filter for hypothermia. Douglas looked at Marcus again. Then he looked at the yellow vouchers fluttering in the wind. His pride fought a war with his survival instinct. It lasted 5 seconds. Then, with a shaking hand, Douglas Lane reached out and took the charity vouchers. He didn't look back up at me. He couldn't. The shame was too absolute. He turned around, hunched his shoulders against the wind, and began to walk away into the darkness, followed by a woman in a ruined fur coat and a girl who had forgotten how to be anything other than an image. I watched them go until they were just shapes in the gray sleet. I could have stayed there. I could have watched them until they turned the corner. I could have savored every second of their retreat. But the air in the mezzanine was getting cool near the glass, and downstairs, there was music. Downstairs, there were people who were building things instead of destroying them. I turned my back on the window. I didn't close the curtains. I didn't need to hide the view. I simply didn't care about it anymore. I walked back toward the stairs. The sound of the jazz trio grew louder with every step, replacing the phantom silence of the street. I smoothed the skirt of my gray dress. I touched the silver pin on my lapel. I descended the stairs and walked back into the light. Eleanor was waiting for me with a plate of food. "Is it handled?" she asked. "It is handled," I said. And I picked up a fork, leaving the cold outside where it belonged. The gala was winding down. The jazz trio had packed away their instruments, leaving only the soft hum of the building's heating system and the distant murmur of the cleaning crew clearing away the champagne flutes. The air in the grand hall still held the faint, sweet scent of victory, a mix of expensive perfume, stale wine, and the electricity of promises kept. But I found that I did not want to be inside anymore. I needed air. I stepped out onto the wide stone balcony that overlooked the valley. The rain had finally stopped. leaving the night air scrubbed clean and sharp. The clouds had broken apart, revealing a moon that looked like a coin tossed into a dark well. Below me, the lights of Horizon Haven glowed in the darkness. It was strange to look at it from this height. For months, I had known that project only as mud, rebar, and blueprints. I had known it as the smell of wet drywall and the sound of shouting foremen. But tonight, it was finished. It was alive. I leaned against the stone railing, the cold seeping through the sleeves of my gray dress. But I did not shiver. I watched the windows. In Unit 4, the one where I had filmed the video that changed everything, I saw the blue flicker of a television set. A shadow moved across the blinds. It was Sarah, carrying a basket of laundry. In the walkway between Unit 8 and Unit 9, 2 teenagers were sitting on the steps, their heads bent over a textbook, studying under the safety of the security lights. It was a living, breathing ecosystem. I thought about the story my parents had written for me on that stage 1 year ago. In their version of the script, the daughter who received nothing was supposed to wither. I was supposed to fade into the background, a cautionary tale of mediocrity, while my sister sat on a throne made of $55 million. I looked at the lights below. I looked at the rooflines I had fought for. I looked at the future I had physically built with my own hands. Their script had not just failed, it had been burned to ash. The glass door behind me slid open with a soft hiss. I didn't turn around. I knew the cadence of those footsteps. "It is a good view," Eleanor said, coming to stand beside me. She was holding a glass of sparkling water in one hand and a thin navy blue folder in the other. "It is better than the view from the Lane estate," I said quietly. "There are no gates down there, just doors." "Speaking of the Lane estate," Eleanor said, her voice neutral. She placed the folder on the flat stone of the railing. "The bank completed the foreclosure proceedings this morning. The property is officially vacant. Douglas and Vivian have removed their personal effects, the artwork, the furniture, the chandeliers. Everything that wasn't bolted down has been sold to cover the outstanding debts." I looked at the folder. The label on the front read Ridgeline Community Holdings. It was one of the many anonymous shell companies Heartlight used to acquire land without inflating the prices. "The bank was eager to offload a distressed asset," Eleanor continued, "especially one with such significant maintenance costs. They accepted a cash offer this afternoon. It was 40% below market value." I reached out and opened the folder. The deed was on top. The address was burned into my memory. 1200 Highcrest Drive, the place where I had learned to walk, the place where I had learned to hide, the place where I had been told to leave. And there, listed as the new owner, was Ridgeline Community Holdings. "You bought it," I whispered. "Nah. No, Mackenzie," Eleanor corrected me softly. "You bought it. The bonuses from the Horizon Haven completion, combined with the settlement money you recovered. Well, let's just say you are the majority shareholder of Ridgeline Community Holdings." I stared at the paper. I owned it. I owned the iron gate that Colin had locked. I owned the marble foyer where I had been humiliated. I owned the driveway where I had walked into the rain. "Do you want the keys?" Eleanor asked. "You could move back in. You could renovate. You could fill it with your own things and look down on the town like a queen." I looked up at the dark silhouette of the hill in the distance. I could just barely make out the roofline of the mansion against the stars. It looked small from here, like a dollhouse that someone had forgotten to put away. "No," I said. The answer was instant. "I don't want to live there. That house is a museum to a life that was cold and empty. If I live there, I am just haunting my own ghost." "Then what do you want to do with it?" Eleanor asked. "We could flip it, sell it to a developer, tear it down." "No," I said again. An image formed in my mind. It was clearer than any blueprint I had ever drawn. "The location," I said, my voice gaining strength. "It is right on the bus line, but it is secluded. It is quiet. It has a library. It has internet infrastructure." I looked at Eleanor. "I want to turn it into a school." Eleanor raised an eyebrow, a small smile playing on her lips. "A school?" The Lane Learning Center, I said, tasting the name. But not for the elite. I want it to be for the people down there. I pointed to Horizon Haven. For the first-generation college students who don't have a quiet place to study, because they share a bedroom with 3 siblings. For the single mothers who want to learn coding or accounting but can't afford the night classes. For the people my father called peasants. The vision rushed at me, vibrant and colorful. I saw my old bedroom, the one where I used to cry into my pillow because I wasn't good enough. I saw the bed gone. I saw rows of computer stations. I saw a girl sitting there, filling out a college application, realizing that her future was wide open. I saw the grand marble foyer, the place where the elite of Northbridge had sipped champagne and judged me. I saw it filled with colorful mats. I saw toddlers running across the slippery stone, laughing, while their parents learned skills in the next room. I saw the ballroom, the cavernous room with the crystal chandeliers where Douglas had announced the $55 million trust. I saw it filled with folding chairs. I saw a lecturer standing on the stage. Maybe me, maybe Marcus, teaching financial literacy, teaching people how to read a loan agreement, teaching them how to never, ever let someone forge their signature. I want to keep the name, I said. Lane, I want to keep it on the sign. Why? Eleanor asked. After everything they did? Because that is the real revenge, I said. If I tear the house down, they become martyrs. If I sell it, they become victims of the economy. I looked at her, and I felt a profound sense of peace settle over me. But if I take their symbol of exclusion and turn it into a symbol of opportunity? If I take the house they used to prove they were better than everyone else, and I fill it with the people they despised? That rewrites the history. They wanted the name Lane to mean royalty. I am going to make it mean service, and there is absolutely nothing they can do to stop it. Eleanor closed the folder. She tapped it against the railing. The Lane Learning Center, she said. I like it. It will require significant retrofitting. The zoning permits will be a nightmare. I know a good project manager, I said, smiling. She is very good at yelling at contractors. I heard she is terrifying, Eleanor agreed. We stood there for a long time, watching the moon rise higher. I thought about Douglas, Vivian, and Sloane. I wondered where they were tonight. I wondered if they were eating the soup from the kitchen I sponsored. I wondered if they were sleeping in a motel bed, blaming the world for their misfortune. I waited for the anger to come. I waited for the urge to drive to their motel and wave the deed in their faces. I waited for the need to call Sloane and tell her that I owned her childhood bedroom. But the anger didn't come. Instead, I felt a strange, quiet pity. They were trapped in a prison of their own making, obsessed with status, obsessed with what they had lost. I was free. I didn't need them to apologize. I didn't need them to see me. I didn't need their $55 million or their approval. I had built something that money couldn't buy. I had built a spine. I had built a legacy. And I had built it with the very stones they had thrown at me. I picked up my glass of sparkling cider. The bubbles danced in the moonlight. To the house on the hill, I said softly, raising the glass toward the dark silhouette. May it finally serve a purpose. Then I lowered the glass toward the lights of Horizon Haven. And to the new foundation. I took a sip. It was crisp and cold. Are you ready? Eleanor asked. The staff is waiting to lock up. I am ready, I said. I turned my back on the view. I turned my back on the empty mansion and the ghost of the girl who used to live there. I walked toward the glass doors of the gala hall. Inside, the lights were still warm. Inside, there was work to be done. There were blueprints to draw for the new school. There were permits to file. There was a life to be lived. I stepped across the threshold, my heels clicking on the stone floor, echoing with a sound that was solid and sure. My parents had told me to leave with one suitcase. I had done exactly that. But what they didn't understand, what they could never understand, was that I didn't leave empty-handed. I took the only thing that mattered. I took myself. And as I walked into the light, I knew that was worth more than $55 million could ever buy. Thank you so much for listening to Mackenzie's story and walking this road of redemption and justice with us. I would love to know where you are tuning in from today. Please leave a comment below and let's get a conversation started. If you enjoyed this story, please make sure to subscribe to the Lila Revenge Stories channel, like this video, and smash that hype button so we can share this journey with even more people. See you in the next story.